Welcome to the Meet Me podcast, a podcast all about our multifaceted human nature and constant journey through self-discovery, with personal stories and insights around trauma, motherhood, relationships, spirituality, and individuality. I'm your host, Michelle Malik. Thanks for listening. Hi, and welcome back to the Meet Me podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Malik, and through this podcast, I hope to support others in transforming and transmuting their trauma and experiences into power, purpose, and connection. I'm excited to be back. I have been on a little bit of a hiatus. I took some time away. I felt really called to take a break, which at the time felt really necessary. And then I think through sort of the downtime that I received, I sort of spiraled into a lot of self-deprecation and doubt. And so I wanted to come back here with a solo episode and just kind of talk through some of the recent shifts that have been happening for me. I'm sure, especially with the astrology that's been going on, I'm sure a lot of others listening may be able to relate to some of the confusion or some of the kind of being forced to pause energy that has been coming through lately. And I'm so excited that I finally feel my energy returning. I feel more inspired to pick my projects back up and just kind of allow things to flow naturally. What I struggled with was really at the core root of the issue was me sort of obsessing over the outcome and the timing and how I guess I expected or wanted things to play out. And I'm really being led to surrender, not my favorite word. Ever since I started my spiritual path, that has been something that is thrown around constantly, right? Surrender to the outcome, surrender to the divine. And it's a nice thought, for me, but not something I've ever really had a strong suit in. I, again, am somebody who likes to have structure, likes to know cause and effect, likes to know that if I do this, then this is going to be what turns out from that. So it's been a little bit of a struggle this past month or so in trying to identify where it is that I fit, what it is that I'm really being guided towards, and what it is that's within my control to do now and what's not. And, being able to truly release what is not in my control and leave it up to divine timing, leave it up to whatever the powers that maybe allow that to flow. So excited to be picking the podcast up again. I had also posted a collective reading for the first time in a while as well. That's something that I just hit the brakes on everything, truly. And it kind of came from a place of burnout. I had shared on the podcast that I started doing these collective readings, and it was so much fun because, again, I've done readings for myself daily for the past few years, and so figured why not channel that into supporting others along their path, just giving them some encouragement or guidance. And I think sort of the tricky thing with trying to have a presence on social media is that it's really hard to not get swept up. I think especially because I went into it with no clear boundaries. I kind of was just like, well, I'll just post when I want to post. I'll just do this. I kind of forced myself into posting daily, even on days where maybe I wasn't fully feeling it. And then I got really disheartened when I didn't see the growth that I guess I had expected or thought I would receive. And throughout this whole process of me developing not only on a personal level, trying to understand like my entrepreneurial route and being open to that taking some more time. I've also been developing in more of my intuitive and my psychic abilities as well. That, to be honest, has also caused for some confusion. And I want to speak to that for anybody else who maybe is on their spiritual journey or is kind of starting to develop those gifts within themselves, because it can feel quite isolating at times, or again, very confusing. Just from my recent experience, again, I kind of reached a point of burnout with posting the readings daily, started to get disheartened, was like, let me just take a step back and reevaluate and figure out how it is that I want to show up, making sure that I'm not allowing things like comparison or seeing other channelers or readers and letting that impact the way that I show up, and really wanted to just take a step back to figure out what my niche was or where it is that I fit. And I got hit with this intuitive idea, or even, I guess, a vision of where I'm really headed and what my end goal is. And to be completely honest with you, I never fully intended to be like a tarot reader, even though it's something that I do, and have always really had a passion to work in the area of psilocybin, which is something that I will share on a separate podcast episode just about my journey in discovering that and how it really assisted in my spiritual awakening journey. But I sort of was hit with this vision of like, doing psilocybin retreats or more like retreat focused work. And that really felt like aligned with my soul calling, aligned with my soul purpose. And so I started to get in my head of like, well, if that's what I want to do, like, why am I doing what I'm doing, right? Why am I doing this podcast? Why am I doing these collective readings? Is that really going to get me where I want to go? And so for the past few weeks, I've kind of been going back and forth with what are the steps that I need to take right now in order to get me to my end goal or to my end dream? Because as I've shared before, and something I firmly believe is like, we are capable of creating our own reality. We are capable of manifesting anything that we desire, that is aligned to our soul's calling. And I always say, like, no matter how big our dreams, no matter how impossible they may seem, they are possible. And if you have a vision where you see yourself doing something, the reason for that is because you likely have that in another timeline, or maybe you've experienced it in a past life. These are kind of like heady ideas, so stay with me here. But I believe that those desires come from a state of our own souls knowing that it's something that we not only deserve, but have done in the past or have done, timing doesn't really exist outside of our 3D reality. So something that we have done in some variation of where we're at. But anyway, I allowed kind of this, and again, with my development of my psychic gifts, I started to get really obsessed with the outcome and really obsessed with the timing, because as you also know, I am not currently employed full time. I was laid off from my corporate job. It's been about 4.5 months now. And so I think I also started to allow the stress of finances kind of veer me off track or veer me off of doing actions that are just aligned and inspired, and more so putting pressure on, well, I need to do this because in order to make money, in order to sustain my lifestyle, I have to do this output and I have to do it in this way. And that is really something that I've had to shed and let go of, because at the end of the day, timing doesn't really exist. Divine timing is really the only thing that determines when something comes into our lives and when something works out. And I really put myself in this position where I convinced myself that if it doesn't happen by this certain time, then this is clearly not the path that I need to be going down. And again, because I started to think more of doing retreats and working in that kind of environment, I sort of looked at what I was doing on a social media regard as less than or not enough. And what I've come to realize recently is that yes, it was important for me to rest. I think I needed to take a step back, identify what my boundaries are when it comes to the content that I'm creating, the content that I'm putting out there, and really what the purpose of it is. Because at the end of the day, I've always wanted this to just be some form of allowing me to be vulnerable about my journey, allowing me to share lessons that I've experienced in the hopes that it'll reach one person who maybe is going through something similar or has struggled with something similar in the past that can relate to it. I didn't initially start this just because I wanted to make a certain amount of money and then go do retreats. So I felt myself kind of being shaken with where my life was heading. And again, with social media, as I've discussed many times on the podcast before, it can be really difficult not to fall under the guise of like, I'm not doing enough, or just constantly comparing to the people who have rightfully probably been doing this for years and have a huge following or have all this success or are able to put together, their dream life because of the hard work that they've put in. And that is something that I was really resistant to for myself for whatever reason. And I've been healing a lot of not only my money wounds, because that has been a huge thing. I've always been raised in an environment where you have to hustle, you have to work hard, you have to take these specific steps in order to have a sustainable life, in order to, everything was very practical, everything was very logical. And as I've developed in my spiritual journey, kind of the practicality and the logical side of my brain is shifting, because when I start taking on more spiritual concepts, things like timing isn't real, it's all about energy, all of those factors, there has to come to a balance. And I kind of failed to find that balance over the past few weeks. And I'm again glad that I'm kind of getting back into the swing of things. But there was a while where I was convinced, like, okay, well, then I just need to go fully the other direction. Instead of hustling and grinding to make a name for myself or to make this successful, I'm going to just go full receptive mode. And being in receptive mode is important. I think it's very important for us to be open to the idea of receiving just because we are deserving inherently, not because of something specific that we're having to do all the time. But I swung the pendulum a little bit too far the other way, where I was really focused on receiving, but not taking any inspired action. And not that I wasn't, still focused on my healing journey. I was doing my meditations. I was doing energy healings for myself. I was, journaling and doing all of those kinds of things. But I wasn't really taking inspired action when it came to like my creative projects or creative outlets. And I think that's where I dropped the ball a little bit. And this is, no shame, no guilt. I've gotten out of that period because I was there for a little bit. It's so natural for us to fall into these cycles where, we're asked to pause and we're asked to rest. And I'm glad that I did actually listen to that guidance, because so many times, I don't know if anybody relates to this, but it's like sometimes you're being guided to rest. And if you push through and you continue to hustle, you end up being forced to rest by, getting sick or something, breaking your leg or something like that. I've heard so many stories like this where it's like the universe literally sat you down and said, no, it's time to rest. So I was really grateful that I did take that advice and that guidance of, take a step back, time to rest. But then through my resting period, I allowed some of my past negative patterns or past cycles in my mentality really take a hold, because I was so attached to a specific outcome. I really was convinced that something was going to work out in a specific way. And when it didn't, I just started to spiral and doubt. I started doubting my path. I started doubting my gifts, my abilities. I started thinking, why am I even trying to develop psychically, intuitively? Why am I trying to act as if I'm some healer with all of these capabilities when I can't even call these things into my own life? And obviously that narrative is not helpful whatsoever, but that's just really where I was. I started to think that maybe this wasn't for me. Maybe I made a mistake by, pouring myself into this path when I might just be set out for a quote unquote normal life. And there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, we all have different roles to fill, and whatever it is that makes you feel fulfilled, whatever it is that gives you purpose, that gives you drive, it's fully okay to do those things. I just started to, again, self-deprecate and doubt that this was for me. But again, as I'm coming back to it, I'm realizing that, yes, I was guided to rest. And yes, it was important that I did that. And it was important that I healed some of my wounds around receptivity and the mentality around money. But I also needed to remind myself that as a co-creator, right, when we manifest or when we put things out to the universe, we also have a role to play in co-creation. We can't just put it out there and leave it all to the universe to bring it to us. We still have to take aligned action and aligned steps that kind of, allow the universe to meet us halfway. I've realized that while, yes, I have these big, lofty goals and things that, to be honest, might take years to accomplish, I'm learning to be okay with that. And I'm learning to release the need to know exactly how it pans out. So one of the other things too with developing psychically that's been tricky is that sometimes I'll get these visions or these nudges that feel so real. I think, okay, well, this is going to happen tomorrow. And again, because timing doesn't exist, it's like, for anybody who has had any sort of psychic experience, a psychic nudge, there are times where we receive information that doesn't end up coming into our reality for weeks, for months, for years. And I think I've really had a hard time with allowing that information to come, trusting the information that is being received, and then releasing again the outcome and the timing. I have always been a person who likes to have control. By releasing that, it's felt very, very uncomfortable. And so this is really just me being very vulnerable with where I've been at. how I intend to bring myself back to this awareness and take my own advice. I think about it all the time of like, if I had my friends or people that I loved and cared about, and they were coming to me for advice or venting to me because something wasn't working out in a certain way, it's like, the advice that I would give them is trust that everything that is for you is already for you. If something isn't working out, maybe it just needs a little bit more time. Or if it doesn't feel aligned, then, let it go. But don't beat yourself up. Don't allow your mind to take over what it is that you've done and really like marvel at your progress. And so I'm learning to take my own advice in that regard because I realize that as much as I would convince myself like, wow, I'm like exactly where I was a year ago. I had just hit a year on the podcast and it was like a big deal for me that I even made it this far. And then it was like shortly after that I just completely spiraled and dropped everything for a while. And so I started having this narrative of like, oh, wow, here I am again, in my self-deprecation cycle, like I always do. And this is never going to change, blah, 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 blah. But I look back and I realize how much I've grown, how much I've had to let go of. I mean, even in a physical sense, there's been so many shifts. There's been a lot of things happening in my physical reality that have kind of been forcing me to accept that some things, environments, relationships aren't meant to come with you, as you continue down your path. So kind of being okay with like releasing my attachments to certain things. But also I'm like looking back at how much my understanding of spirituality, the world, myself, how much stronger it really is. Even in the moments where we feel like we've taken 10 steps back, I guarantee you that there has been growth that has been happening under the surface that whole time. And it's really not until we stop and pause and give ourselves the pat on the back, give ourselves that encouragement of look how far you've come, look at how you would have been in this same situation a year ago. To be honest, the version of me from like a couple years ago was in this predicament. I probably would not pick back the podcast up, not pick back any of my social media, and just walk away from it completely, go find a comfy, cozy 9-to-5 job and be done with it. But I realized that I've made it this far and I've come too far to revert back to that. But I think in regards to the surrendering piece, I'm also surrendering to the idea of like, it's okay that I'm not, that my business isn't sustainable enough to replace a full-time job right now. It's only been a few months since I've left the corporate world, and being okay with the idea of going back to work if that's what's called of me, and working on these projects in the background or, in my spare time, and just finding better time management for those things, because I think that added pressure really took away the fun and the joy of what I was doing and why I started doing this in the first place. Because everything that I was putting out, everything that I was posting, I had it in the back of my mind of like, this is going to have to work in a certain way, or this is going to have to bring in a certain amount of business, or this is going to have to bring me a partnership or a collaboration because I have to make it in this time. I have to sustain myself with this business by this month. Otherwise, what's it for? And I just want to share all of this with you as a means for encouragement for anybody who is, either going on their own, trying to go down an entrepreneurial route, or, just struggling to find your place in all of it. It's a difficult time to be a human right now. We have so many responsibilities, so many things that we're trying to balance. It's not easy, but be gentle with yourself. Take breaks when you feel called to rest. Be okay with resting. I think that's the other thing of like, I've realized that I have healed a lot in the sense that I used to be somebody who had to stay busy all the time, who had to go, and in order to feel productive. And I'm finding that balance of like, taking rest, taking time for self-care, but then getting back up and continuing forward and tuning into what my heart is asking me to do at this current time, and not allowing my mind to dictate how powerful or how impactful what it is that I do is in the moment, because everything is just compiling onto itself. And eventually I tell myself all the time, I'm like, I know that I'll look back in a few months or a year from now and just be so relieved that I'm out of the place that I was before. And I already feel that way now. And I just want to kind of reset my expectations around everything that I'm doing and hope that through being honest, through being vulnerable, through enjoying the process more, things will just come so much easier, because it's when we grab onto control and we expect and we dictate that this is the only way, that it restricts the universe's ability to bless us. It restricts the universe's ability to come in ways that are so unexpected, because we're only viewing things from one perspective when we do that. We're only viewing things from our own narrowed mind of what we've known, what we've seen, and the universe is limitless. There are so many possibilities that I haven't even considered into how things can work out, into where my life is going to take me. And this isn't to say that I have to be married to the podcast or married to doing collective readings on Instagram and TikTok. You know what I mean? And for you too, it's like you don't have to be stuck doing one specific thing, but it's what can you do today that is going to support the future version of you that you're working towards? What can you embody? You know, and for me, it's being confident in my skills and my abilities and my gifts, even though I've had moments of doubt, or even though there have been things where I was really convinced it was going to go one way and then it didn't. And I start telling myself, well, clearly I'm not freaking intuitive or psychic if I didn't even know that that was going to happen, right? But again, these things can happen and take place on such different timelines than the one that we're stuck to here on Earth. So I am fully receptive to miracles, to enlightenment, to just new ways of doing things that are aligned with the mission that I had and I set forth for myself of supporting others to heal and helping heal the world in whatever big or little way that I can do that. So I hope to hold myself accountable in just being not only more authentic and more open and vulnerable when I am struggling, but to also release the need to solve all my problems or have my bank account look a certain way from these creative projects, and just allow these to be fun and creative and empowering. So I love you for listening. Thank you if you've made it this far. I really appreciate you just letting me ramble on here, and I will be picking it back up with guest conversations and more episodes on the horizon, getting back on my consistent flow. Again, I thank you so much for your support and for listening, and for all of the friends and family that checked in on me when I was a little bit quiet online. I appreciate the belief in me for whichever route I decide. I'm so lucky to have people in my life that give me the space to have moments of doubt and have moments of discontent and still believe that whatever route I decide to go forward in, I will be successful in. So huge shout out to all of you. And I do now offer personalized tarot readings on my website in addition to the regular energy healing services that I have. So those are just like 10-minute personalized guidance or advice for your current situation. They'll just be a recorded video for about 10 minutes that'll get sent straight to your email. So if you're interested, all of that information again is on meetmehealing.com. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to share with you again soon. Thank you so much for spending some of your time and energy listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed this episode or any previous episodes, please don't forget to rate, write a review, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss future episodes. If you're looking for more ways to connect, you can find a list of my one-on-one services at meetmehealing.com. You can also connect with me at meetme.michelle on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Threads. Until next time, bye for now.